Debbie and I hiked the Moselle River Valley Trail in Germany during the first week of September of 2024. Our hike consisted of 6 days of walking from town to town, starting at Trier and ending at Bernkastel-Kues. We knew that there would be the possibility of rain on some days, but when we looked at the weather forecast the first day, it was going to be dry and quite warm, so we wore shorts and our hiking boots the first day. You'll notice from these first few pictures that our hike took us through different areas. I enjoyed the wildflowers, like these yellow dandelion-like flowers. Sometimes the trail took us up steep climbs, and other times it took us through wide open spaces that looked like it had been pasture land at one time. The first day, we didn't know where to stop for our lunch. We had bought some lunch meat and cheese at a little grocery store before leaving Trier. So when noontime came around, we found this spot where the trail divided, and there was a park bench right there in the clearing. We stopped and sat on the bench and enjoyed our lunch and the sunshine with the woods all around us. Many parts of the trail went along steep embankments, and you can see from this cliff that the trail went right along the cliffside, and on the other side was a very steep drop-off into the woods. As we came down off of that mountain into a village, we crossed a little river that flowed into the Moselle River, and there were beautiful flower boxes on a bridge that crossed the river. The architecture of the homes in the villages was really enchanting to me. There was a simplicity and a purity to the design of the homes, and I liked the way the windows were framed. This house has 1793 in big numbers on the front of it, which told us that might have been the year the house was built. When we encountered this small chapel along the trail, we didn't realize that in 6 days of hiking, we would see many of these little chapels. Some were very simple, and some were quite elaborate. As our hike continued, we found wild daisies growing along the trail, and an old board fence lined the roadway that we walked on later. As it grew later in the day, the warm golden sunshine streamed through the trees onto the trail. It is giving us a sense of awe as we continued our hike. Then, when we're out walking in pasture land, the late sun made our shadows longer on the trail ahead of us. It was interesting to find orchards occasionally as we walked through the farmland. It appeared to me that the orchards were no longer being used for production, but that they were being left to just grow apples that sometimes weren't as pretty. The trees were no longer being pruned or cared for so that they would produce beautiful fruit. But I enjoyed seeing these old apple trees and sometimes picking up a ripe apple on the ground that had fallen off the trees. The next day, as we headed out of town, we walked past the beautiful brick church and wound our way through the town and under a highway through a walking tunnel. When we came out of the tunnel, we found ourselves facing a beautiful vineyard in the morning sun. This was the beginning of seeing many vineyards that covered the mountain landscapes. We would see grapes of different colors and varieties. As we would walk along the trail, we would stop and see picturesque vistas of vineyards that covered the sides of the mountains with the river and the villages below. We would stop and look over the landscape and all of the beauty of these vineyards in this valley. I was constantly amazed by the boat traffic on the Moselle River. Here's a picture of a cargo vessel going up the river. As we approached the top of this hill, we found more beautiful wildflowers: Queen Anne's lace, daisies, purple flowers, yellow flowers. Then, as we descended from this hilltop pasture area, the trail became more like a bramble of noxious weeds with a few daisies and wildflowers in between. Because some parts of the trail were steep, people had actually gone to the trouble of putting erosion control steps in the trail, making it easier for us to navigate the steep decline. Did I mention that I'm very fond of my hiking companion? We both enjoy our talking time and our quiet time as we walked and walked and walked. To our surprise, we came out of the woods and another clearing, and there were sheep just grazing in the field and resting in the woods along the trail. They didn't run from us when we walked near them. After hiking for a few hours in the woods and then pasture land, we came upon more vineyards and the river and the little villages that were scattered all along the river, with the vineyards surrounding them on the hillsides. Enchanting. Because I grew up on a farm, I always found it to be fun to see tractors and farm equipment, but especially when they were parked by the houses right in town. Here's a couple more pictures of these beautiful homes in the village. Day 3 took us up some steep climbs. Oh, did I mention that we saw a lot of red slugs along the trail? We saw so many of them that we were always having to be careful not to step on them, but to walk around them. This hike took us up a very steep incline where we walked along the edge of a cliff. This was an arduous climb, but it brought us out to a terrific vista later on. But the descent down from the cliff involved a couple of cables that were hammered into the rock so that we could use them for safety as we descended down the steep hill. I don't know what this flower is, but we saw it a number of times in the woods, with its purple and white colors shaped like a bell that was getting ready to ring in the woods. One landmark that I was looking forward to was the lookout tower. I'm not sure if this was built by the natural resource people to watch for wildfires, or if it was built just for the pleasure of hikers to look at the amazing view. But as we entered the base of the tower, it was a little humorous to see a couple of German religious tracts questioning if you wanted to go to heaven or hell. I felt like I was in heaven most days on this hike. We climbed the steps to be rewarded with an amazing view of the river and the distant vineyards on the hills all around the river and the small villages in the distance. The trail varied from day to day and even from moment to moment. Here you see that the trail looked like a road with beautiful goldenrod growing along the side of it. And then later the trail is a narrow path winding through the woods where even a tree had fallen over and the young tree became an archway over the trail. As we drew close to the end of this day's hike, our view encompassed many acres of vineyards, and I was delighted to see a farmer out mowing between the rows of grapevines. Again, you can see we saw grapes of different colors and varieties. A purple grape is for red wine. Oh, and here were some beautiful wildflowers growing in a fallow area alongside of the vineyards. It kind of reminds me of Crown Vetch back home. And here's some green grapes to make somebody's white wine. We were going to stay at a bed and breakfast that night by the name of Alexanderhof. And as we're getting closer to town, we see a label on one section of vineyard showing that it was owned by the Alexanderhof Vineyard and Winery and Guest House. That was so much fun to me to see the little sign on the grapevine trellis. The Alexanderhof Guest House was just that, a guest house. Our room was on the second floor and there were probably about 6 guest rooms there. In Europe, we learned that all of the queen-size beds have 2 twin box springs and mattresses put together with 2 duvets and 2 pillows on top. I did not like sleeping under a duvet, and I never had a top sheet, only a bottom sheet. That seemed odd to me, but I understand that's the custom there in Germany. Our bathroom at this guest house was actually a few steps down from the bedroom, but it was very clean and accommodating. The guest house had a simple touch, and yet it was elegant in a way. And as most of these bed and breakfasts are situated, there was a room for everyone to have breakfast the next day. Most evenings after we arrived at our accommodations, we walked around town to get a flavor for the village that we were staying in. Some houses were made of stones, while some were stuccoed, perhaps covering stone walls. I think every town had an old wine press that would have been used before the wineries were automated with modern machinery. I don't remember if this beautiful door with its ornate hinges was on a house or a church, but we were often admiring the beautiful old doors on the buildings. The next day seemed typical of other days. We enjoyed a German breakfast of lunch meat, sliced cheese, hard-boiled eggs, and bread. Our hike began by taking us up through the vineyards again, where we found another chapel. After we passed the chapel and climbed higher up the embanked vineyards, we had a lovely view of the chapel situated in the midst of all the vineyards below. We were constantly mesmerized by the views we had across the Moselle River Valley, with its winding river, straight lines of vineyards everywhere, and the small villages tucked along the river and sometimes up on the hills all along the river. The next village that we would come to stay for the night was called Numagen. As we were walking down off the hill through the vineyards, we approached yet another chapel situated right on the highway that followed along the river. The vineyards had a beauty about them in my mind because of the straight lines and how they would go up these steep embankments. And I was treated again by a farmer on his tractor out mowing the weeds down between the rows of vines. This night, we stayed at the Hotel Lekker. When I walked into our room, I was amazed with the high ceilings, the spaciousness of the room, the large windows, and our view through the windows between the buildings out back. This was my favorite place to stay of all of them. Here are some random pictures while we were in this town. This narrow street was the main thoroughfare through the town. This picture shows a sign that is pointing the way to the fire station. For dinner that evening, we ate at the restaurant at the hotel. I had an amazing meal. The meat was tender and delicious. In this town, we knew that people could go on boat rides on an old Roman wine transport ship. Of course, this ship is a replica of the original. As the evening grew into dusk, the lights came on around town, and we were inspired by the beauty of some of the areas of this town, including this restaurant that had tables outside. Breakfast was served in a basement restaurant of the Hotel Lekker. I loved the design of the restaurant and that it was in keeping with the basement structure of the building. As we walked out of town that morning, I had to take some more pictures of the old buildings constructed of stone. The weather forecast showed that we might encounter some rain or drizzly weather on this day. Therefore, we had on our raincoats and rain pants. Debbie liked to find walking sticks as we went along so that she would have a stick to help her in case she had a steep decline on the trail. There was a mist in the air that morning which made the woods appear enchanted. And I don't need to mention that, yes, we came upon another chapel. This chapel was ornate and beautiful. The story we were told was that the village down below on the river suffered from a plague in the 16th century, and many people died. But those who survived and were able to climb up the hill went up to this chapel to pray. As we emerged from the woods, it was time again to descend through the vineyards. The descent was sometimes very steep, but again we were rewarded with beautiful vistas across the valley. We were amused to come across this bench made for giants, and of course I had to climb up on top of it and enjoy the view from up there. The words translated from German mean for legs and soul. We saw so many interesting things on this second to the last day of our hike. An old log with lichens growing on it. Another beautiful vista of the river and its valley. A goat farm. Debbie and I think goats are so cute. More purple grapes. We did hike through some more woods, but as we emerged from the woods, we came upon this glorious scene of the valley. The rolling hills covered with grapevines, the river, and the villages. We encountered another apple orchard, and I picked up a couple of apples from the ground that were beautiful and ripe and so delicious. We arrived in the town that we were going to stay at that night and found another fountain. I'm told that these fountains were originally built as a washing station. I don't know if they were for people to retrieve water to take home to wash, or if they would take things to the fountain to wash. But to me, they looked like they were watering troughs for animals. I was always tempted to refill my water bottle at one of these fountains, but we were warned not to because the water might be contaminated with some bacteria. But boy, it sure looked refreshing. Some beautiful sunflowers growing in a pot by our guest house. Our last day of the hike began by walking through the village and seeing this old community well that has been refurbished. Notice the stone house in the background. Then I was excited to see a farm machine coming up the village street and turning into the house across the street. This machine is used for harvesting the grapes off of the vines. In this next picture, you can see the harvesting machine parked behind the house. It is my assumption that the left-hand side of the house in this picture is the working winery for this family. It was always a treat to find ripe, wild fruit along the trail, and of course, I had to partake. In this picture, we're looking back on the vineyards that we walked through from the town we had stayed in the night before. We walked and we walked and we walked through vineyards that day. As we're hiking through the woods, we had this amazing scene to behold through a break in the trees of the river below and a cargo vessel traveling on the river. There were more wooded trails to hike on as well. This chapel is actually located on a little clearing in the woods. You can see the mosaic of tiles used to create this elaborate picture on the outside of the chapel. I was in awe as I stood there and looked up at it. On this last day, our hike would bring us to the Castle Landshut, which, like most castles, is set high up on a promenade overlooking the valley. I had really been looking forward to seeing this castle. Much of it has been restored, but much of it is lost to wear and tear over the centuries. Because the castle overlooks the river valley, it is a great place to take pictures. We needed to use the restroom that was there, so I fished 0.70 euros out of my pocket to pay for our use of the toilet. We went into the restaurant and enjoyed sitting down and relaxing for a little bit over a bottle of sparkling water. Then I paid €1 to climb up the tower of the castle. As I looked through the tower window, I could see the incredible view that was below. This picture is not the effect of a wide-angle camera or a fish lens, for the river really makes a complete U-shape here at the base of this castle. Across the river is the village of Kues, and at the base of the castle cliff is the village of Bernkastel. When I descended from the tower, Debbie asked me to take her picture at this window area that overlooks the river. Again, I will say it was a magnificent view from up there. As we descended from the castle, I had to look back and take another picture of this majestic stone structure high up on the cliff. Because the castle is a very touristy area, there was a gravel path with handrails that went from Bernkastel all the way up. Here you see I had to take yet another picture of beautiful yellow flowers with Queen Anne's lace in the background. When we finished our hike of 6 days, we landed ourselves in the middle of this enchanting village of Bernkastel. To summarize my feelings about this hiking adventure, I am so glad to have seen the goats. Our forest walks were peaceful. The farmland was magnificent, and the vineyards were always captivating. I would definitely want to experience it again because of the beauty of the Moselle River Valley.